Hey, how you doing, Facebook world? I'm so sorry. I know we're behind an hour, but some storms down here in O Town, and it caused me to have some technical difficulties. But it's good to know that we are here talking with the champ, Mr. Lee Kemp. I can go through his accolades. I'm sure you all know the three-time world champ, three-time state champ, two-time state champ in high school, three-time NCAA champ. We can just keep going. He's got medals for days, and now he's with us here today, Coach Kemp. How are you, sir?
I'm doing fantastic, and I really looking forward to being on your show. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, man, I really appreciate it, and sorry for all the technical difficulties, but we did it. We're here, and and we're getting ready to go live. But first of all, man, talk about this off season, Coach.
Yeah, wow. We're going through obviously unprecedented times, and only history will be able to frame it for us. I mean, because we're living through it right now. But we can look back on history at similar situations, other pandemics that have occurred. Uh, I know we'll get into this, but I went through the boycott of 1980, missed my opportunity in wrestling. This year, athletes and lots of sports, not just wrestling, missed the opportunity to go to the national tournament, and then the Olympic Games being postponed, quarantine. I mean, this is crazy times. The racial tensions that are going on in our country.
Yeah,
This truly is one for the history books that our grandkids will be reading about someday.
yeah, it's yeah. I feel bad, obviously, for those seniors that didn't get to for their last hurrah in college, and of course, um, nowadays they say, well, we'll just push the Olympics a year. I'm sure you wish they would have done that in 1980.
Oh, at least it's some hope. Gives you some hope, and that's all any of us wanted was just a little bit of hope, something to hang on to.
Yeah, they would have said to you, "Don't worry, we'll do it in '81."
Oh, I'm in.
That
I'm in. I'd have been right there,
would have been
right
great.
there.
Well, cool. I mean, obviously, that was a long time ago. I'm sure it's in your memory, but I'm sure you've done a lot of great things in life that have pushed that down into the back of your head a little bit. Am I right by saying that, or is it still
Oh,
fresh in your memory?
no, no. I think in life you have to move on, and I've been called upon to give my opinion or perspective on the postponement of the Olympic Games because I was an Olympian during '80. I've been on a couple other uh, podcasts expressing my views. I was on one with Edwin Moses, who was on just a legendary Olympian of 76, 80, and 84 Olympic Games. Greg Louganis and people like that were on the same podcast, so I was honored to be on that one as well. And we were talking about that specific event. But you know what? I'm 63 now, so if I haven't been able to move on, then boy, I've got some serious issues. Um, so but it hurts. It's like the death. I explain it like a death of a loved one. Like in my case, as parents, and I know you're a parent, death of a child or death of a spouse. I mean, that's horrible, horrific. It's terrible. But you have to keep living, and you have to get past it. You never really forget about it, but you find ways to cope with it. So my tagline at the end of it, pretty much whenever, or at least the theme that I want the takeaway to be when I talk about disappointments and things like the Olympics being boycotted or canceled or this pandemic or all this stuff. It's my prayer and hope for people is that after it's over and whatever the new norm is, we still have to continue our lives. So then when you get to be like my age at 63, I hope you can say you're still standing, you know, trying to be
Yeah, for
productive.
sure. Do you still have a special bond with that team?
Yeah, oh, yes, absolutely. Just like in sports, a lot of my longtime friends are from my college days on the wrestling team back in the 70s, and some of the Olympians that I shared so much time with during those years, 1978 through 1984, actually, I still am good friends with. So don't talk as much, but we share so much. Uh, we're like war buddies, you know. When you
Yeah.
go through wars together, you may not see someone for 20, 30 years, but when you see them again, whether it's war, whether it's sports, whether it's some real, critical thing or time in your life that a lot was at stake. I mean, war, I'm not comparing war with the sport because the war, people die, but in sports, you do give your heart and soul to something and to your team or whatever. And so you kind of come out the other end with these relationships that are lifelong.
Absolutely. And well, talk a little bit about what you're doing now. You came up with obviously, we'll definitely big Chuck Morris says, "Tell the champ I said what's up." And
Awesome, awesome.
yeah, so obviously you're doing something right now called the Greatest Season, where you're putting different clips together, and talk about that and the motivation behind it, and and so forth.
I have to give credit to Brian Stout. He was the man who came up with the idea, and I was working for him in his apparel company called Go Earn It, GOEARN, and then IT. Go Earn It. It's a cool name, really, but that has a whole story to itself. But anyway, it's a wrestling and combat sports apparel company, but primarily wrestling. And so I was a rep for him, selling the apparel at wrestling tournaments, things like that. And I kind of got to know Brian quite a bit. And he was a wrestler and he coached wrestling, and he always used to talk to me about how incredible he thought it was that I could go from, just starting wrestling only in ninth grade, making the varsity only in 10th grade, and then the next year being a state champion. So he always talked about that. So uh, he said, Lee, I want to do something to get that message out to people because I think it's an important one. I think young wrestlers could benefit, coaches could benefit. So anyway, he created it, meaning he financed it. He hired a cinematographer or a videographer and he had me come up with kind of what my ideas might be. And our idea was to follow wrestlers through 16 weeks of their wrestling season. So there's 16 individual separate video messages from me talking about the mindset, and primarily what I did to have in just one season that incredible turnaround. And it's not wrestling moves really. I mean, of course, I learned wrestling. I was in great shape. I did everything the coach told me to, but what was different? And that's what Brian wanted to capture. So it's 16 separate videos of me just talking about the mindset and the strategies that I use, the different techniques I used, not wrestling techniques really, but just lifestyle changes that I made, um, people that I put myself around in order to draw their knowledge, like Dan Gable, for instance. When I was a high school sophomore going into my junior year, I met Dan Gable. So a lot of people have the opportunity to meet someone that they're aspiring to be like. But what do you do when you have that opportunity? Do you just sit in the back and listen, or do you get in the front and do you participate? I got in the front and I participated. Not only did I participate, I got up and I was this drill partner. So I was drilling with Dan when I was a nobody. When I had just started wrestling, Dan was going to be arguably one of the greatest wrestlers in the history of the sport. He's revered all over the world. He's a legend in wrestling all over the world. Uh, when he won his Olympic gold medal in 1972, I had the opportunity a month and a half before he went to Munich to win that gold medal. I was a 14-year-old kid at a camp that he was teaching wrestling to.
Wow. And you definitely had something to say about that because fast forward a few years, you got your opportunity in the circle with them.
And that's a whole motivational speech all by itself.
Yeah.
I mean, it literally less than less than 4 years, probably 3 years and about 6 months after I met him, as a 14-year-old, sophomore in high school, had just started wrestling. Literally, it was my first year of varsity. In less than 4 years, I'm wrestling this guy, and it's truly a David and Goliath scenario. And how do you even approach that is a whole mastermind course in mental training.
Yeah, talk. I mean, first of all, Brian Stout. I got the opportunity to have him on. I had no idea that Go Earn It was his company. Um, I I had before I even started this show, I had purchased something from Go Earn It for my kids, and I called him up, and I
Awesome.
and I didn't even know I didn't know that that was him back then. But I've had Brian Stout on the show, um, and he was kind enough to reach out to friends of his. So I've had like the pit coaches on, and I've had different coaches on. I've had club coaches on that he referred on. So what a super nice guy, and he's got some kids that aren't doing too bad either, right?
Yes. Yeah. In fact,
One's about to go to
I'm
Princeton,
gonna.
right?
It's interesting that connection with Brian. He's a guy that does things to help people, looking for no benefit of his own, and that's
Right.
kind of how he always was. When I first met him, I had I created a nutritional company, uh, and I ended up gaining the endorsement from USA Wrestling, and my company was called Forza, Forz as in zebra A, Forza, which means force, strength, and power in Italian. I just thought it was a cool word. Um, but I was at tournaments, kids tournaments, promoting my nutritional stuff, and high school tournaments, and so was Brian, getting his apparel company off the ground. So I'd see him in his booth, and we always started to communicate with each other, and wanting nothing in return. He always did things to help me with my company, you know, and he did videos with me promoting not only my company, but just a message, not even really saying anything about Go Earn It. He was more focused on my message of trying to help young wrestlers, and
Yeah,
never,
same with me because
he
I'm
didn't want
on
me
the
to promote
show.
Go Earn It. It wasn't like he wanted me on to promote Go Earn It. He said, Lee, I think you have a great message. I just want to video you and just have you tell your great message, and I hope it helps you get you business for your company. That's all he would say, and you don't meet people like that very often.
No, yeah, he was awesome. I mean, I didn't even know that that was his company. I've had him on the show. We talked about his kids wrestling. Like I said, he referred me to a bunch of people, and yeah, I had no idea this company. I actually I get the emails from him because I had bought a cool singlet that he put out one year for my kids.
Hmm.
So cool stuff. I've got. Let's see. Somebody said you are interviewing one of the wrestlers who would be on the Mount Rushmore of wrestling.
I
Uh,
appreciate that. Of course, I don't really believe that, but Gable should be on there. I don't care what anybody says. If there is a Mount Rushmore, Gable did more to shape wrestling than any one person. It was just a perfect storm that created Dan Gable.
that's
And
awesome.
of course, there's others. I can't even begin to mention names because there's some powerful names that go unnoticed. I think the first world champion in U.S. history was Rick Sanders. You cannot have a Mount Rushmore without that. The first in anything is very important. I think in the 1969 maybe, uh, World Championships, somewhere around there, Rick Sanders won the first world title of any American in wrestling. That's a milestone achievement.
Wow, that's cool. Yeah, and so Coach Howard Camp, Bob Howard Camp, just he sent a question here. He said, ask him what lessons he learned and would pass on to people today from the 1980 Olympic boycott.
That's a great question, and that's one you can only learn sort of by going through a horrific disappointment. Maybe horrific is too strong a word, but what you learn, the first thing you learn is things don't always work out the way you want them to. Doesn't matter how bad you want something, it may not happen. It may not work out. And the key is what happens to your mind and to your body and to everything that is the essence of who you are after that disappointment. That's what really defines you as a human being, is how you really respond to obstacles and disappointments. And what greater disappointment to a pure athlete like myself and others is having the Olympic Games boycotted, or in the case of the 2020 Games postponed, or in the case of the wrestlers in the NCAA tournament, uh, some of them in their senior year having the pandemic cause the sports to be kind of, basically canceled basically for the rest of the school year. And that was baseball, that was wrestling, that was maybe basketball too, whatever else that was going on, and they can't get that back. So, and it's very similar to, maybe, as I said earlier, like having death of a loved one, right? That happens unexpectedly. It happens. You never get over it, but the fact is, you have to move on with your life. That doesn't end your life. It just is a horrible disappointment that you go through. I'm a parent of 3 kids. I don't know how I would feel losing a child, or losing, I'm not married now, but losing a spouse or whatever. They're all bad stuff. Losing the Olympics, losing, maybe having your season cut short because of an injury. It's all bad. It's all bad stuff. Maybe getting bad news from your doctor that you have to go through battling cancer. We all know someone, and in any one of those arenas and more, uh, it's resilience. It's resilience. And a good friend of mine, Saeed Ismaili, coined a term. He's a British coach, and kind of coaches a lot of legendary boxers and UFC fighters. And he's had me come to the UK to teach wrestling. Saeed Ismaili is his name, and he coined a term called resilience. You take the word resilience, the real word with res, when you put a W in front of it, and that's what you become when you're a wrestler. You have to be resilient with the W in front of the R of resilience.
Very
That's
cool.
the answer I would give. It's wrestling, or resilience is what you learn from being a wrestler, because nothing happens 100% the way you want it to. Even Gable got beat. And think about how humbling it was for Gable to get beat by an 18-year-old sophomore in college. It just is unheard of. It's like, how does that happen? Just picture Jordan Burroughs or Kyle Dake in their prime, and then they're competing against an 18-year-old wrestler that's in the beginning in November of their sophomore year in college, and they're already a Olympic and world champion. You would think there is no chance, that they could even be on the mat with it. Put Kyle Snyder in that category. So that's what I was faced with, and I saw Dan, the way he humbly handled that, like a real man, like showed no temper tantrums, no shook my hand, and he stayed around the tournament until the end too. Didn't leave. Uh, he talked to people, talked to reporters. He got on the award stand. There's a picture. I don't show it to you. I've never shown it to anyone because I don't think it's fair, really. But he's on the award stand with me, standing second in this little tournament called the Northern Open. Like, he didn't even need to be there. In fact, when it happened that I won, he could have left and nobody would have cared, in terms of feeling, or I shouldn't care. No one would have criticized him for leaving. It just, people assumed he wouldn't stay around, but he stayed. And me, as a young, impressionable person, 18 years old, that had a huge impact on me. I didn't know Dan. He doesn't remember even meeting me 3 years earlier at that wrestling camp. Of course, why would he? I was just one of 200 kids at that camp. But I learned so much about what it means to be a good winner, and what it means to be a good to be good in defeat, because we don't win them all.
Absolutely. And there's a gentleman, Jason Halebak. Sorry, Jason, if I totally kiboshed your last name. I apologize. But he put down here, and he said, he prefaced this and said, if you don't want to answer this on the air, you can go on and message him later and do your thing later. But he just put, I'm pretty much tired of talking about race, especially by those who I don't really care to listen to. I know that you grew up with racial tension. Do you think things have changed for better or worse, and how much, if so? Again, I don't want to put you on the spot where your word can be used against you, so don't answer live if you don't want to. You know.
No, I'd love to talk about it because, it's obviously it's a very volatile subject in America, and it's been just simmering under the surface for 400 years. You know what I mean? It's like maybe the early part of the 400, it was more overt than it became after the Emancipation Proclamation of 1865 or so. It became more, like, laws trying to change the Voting Rights, Civil Rights Acts, all that kind of stuff. You see black billionaires now. Obviously, things have changed. I can't. It'd be stupid for me to say it hasn't changed. You've got these sports icons. You've got business icons. The I think the CEO, if that is the correct title, or executive director of the Big Ten, is a black man. He's a commissioner. I think that's the title of all the Big Ten sports. And Big Ten is one of the biggest conferences, if not the biggest conference in the United States, and it's a black man running that. There are black women that are CEOs of. It's not a lot, but there are some. So yeah, things obviously have changed in big ways. I think there's opportunities for people of all races, all colors. I think there's, you know, but the one thing I will say, there's racial tensions just simmering under the surface all the time, and uh, and I think it stems from misinformation. It stems from the media inciting things, I'm not going to mention networks and stuff, but sometimes you'll see an article that gets surfaced at the critical time when it could create the most emotional rage, I guess, so people aren't calmly talking about things. Uh, Maybe what your listener, the reason why he's asking, he may have seen some of the posts I've been making, and what I try to do is mainly give information. And I think if the correct information would have been disseminated in all of our public schools from the beginning, like after the Emancipation Proclamation, let's start putting the real, truthful information so all races can learn the truth. Similarly to, like, we still celebrate Columbus Day. And I think everybody knows by now Columbus did not discover this land we call America. It had been inhabited for who knows how long prior to that. And even prior to that, I mean, it depends on how far back you want to go back in history. So I think, you know, the narrative of history is written by the person writing it. And there are a lot of things written out of history. And I came through the American school system just like everybody else, all the maybe the white listeners that are listening here. I never learned about my heritage as a black person in America. The only thing I learned about was Martin Luther King, and that's a name that most of the people will throw out right away because that's a name that they remember. They throw out Martin Luther King, but then from their narratives that they've been fed, Malcolm X was bad, but Martin Luther King was good. They just kind of throw out these little name drops. But what I would say to the listeners is now with the advent of the internet, you can just do a couple Google searches and you can find all the information you ever would want to learn about race tensions and relations in the United States. Just like the Tulsa riots, which are now becoming more known, and you probably have even heard of it. Some of your listeners have. If you haven't, just Google Tulsa race riots and others, and you'll see the things that have happened throughout history that have been totally covered up and hidden. And I think, and then even the movie Hidden Figures. If your listeners have not even if they don't know about that movie, or they don't know what that movie was about, it was about a group of three minorities, three black women in particular, that were central figures in the space race of NASA. And Mary Thomas, I think, was one of the ladies' names. But just Google Hidden Figures, you can see the movie, dig into it, and you see that if things like that, and that was during the early 1960s, if that information was public and in our public schools, we might have more scientists, we might have more doctors, we might have more people of color aspiring for greatness and not only believing that they could be athletes. So those type of uh, uh, honoring accomplishments of black women and men like that was suppressed on purpose. And that's the problem I have. And that's what creates the racial tensions today. It creates this divide of white people basically feeling like black people haven't contributed anything to American society other than maybe, being sports figures like the Michael Jordans of the world. And even me, I fall in that category because I was a good wrestler. So, but I was taught, my parents taught me to study and learn a little bit about my Black history. So I knew Black people had contributed a large amount to American society. And if you and it just depends on who you're talking to, but the average white person would kind of know by now that the Civil War, one of the key integral parts of that was slavery. It was a divide between the North and the South, and the South succeeded from the Union. That Civil War was based on treachery and treason. I mean, you would be killed for that today if you tried to overthrow the American government and you lost. You would be executed. That's what the South tried to do when they tried to
Secretly.
overthrow the Union at that time. If they would have won, slavery would have continued. So let's talk about the real truth of what that really was about. And when you get to the heart of that, some white people get uncomfortable. They don't want to hear it like that. There are Confederate statues of the generals of that war still up in the South. Some of them are being torn down now. The Confederate flag people have, put up as like more of a novelty thing. It's almost like wearing a cross. If you're, it's like a fashion statement, but not knowing what it really means. So, yeah, it's a volatile issue that can only be solved through education and knowledge, and the knowledge is certainly out there. And I grew up in an all white town, Chardon, Ohio. My family was treated with the utmost respect and kindness and courtesies. So the Grantham family being one of many families, I owe most of my wrestling early success to my high school wrestling coach. Obviously, was the whole town was white. There's maybe one black family, two, three at the most in Chardon at the time we moved there. When I moved there with my family in seventh grade. So then I went to Wisconsin, a predominantly white school. So was there racism? Of course there was. Was I called the N word? Of course. Did that stop me? No, it didn't. I was able to persevere. When Jackie Robinson broke the color barrier in baseball, when Branch Rickey brought him on, he said to him, look, you're going to have to deal with a lot of racism, but do you want to take this opportunity to be in Major League Baseball? And Jackie Robinson said yes. And he took a lot of racism. He couldn't even stay in the same hotels as the rest of his team, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, it's something that people don't want to talk about because it makes white people uncomfortable sometimes because it's almost like when someone like me speaks up and out about it, white people think I'm pointing the finger right at them, like you did this to me. You did. No, I'm not saying that. Let's just learn our history, and with that knowledge, we can move forward in truth, and we can make changes that are going to be beneficial for all. And just like the whole Kaepernick kneeling thing, that got blown so out of proportion and twisted, about disrespecting the flag. That had nothing to do with the flag. So that's a whole other tangent that I could go off on. But I appreciate your listener wanting a perspective, and I appreciate that he respects me enough to want to ask me that question. And sure, I mean, I'm speaking publicly on the internet, and I hope I'm not offending anyone. That's not my goal. To tell the truth about what's really happening. Uh, since we're talking about race, I'll use this story, this quick little anecdotal story that I think will help tell a little bit about what's going on in like South side of Chicago and some of the urban cities that have all these black on black crime. Whenever I speak on issues like Black Lives Matter, someone will always bring up, well, what about black people killing each other in Chicago? Yeah, okay, that's true. That's horrible. It's horrific. But let's just look deeper and try to understand why that situation exists. And so I throw out this example, Beverly Hills. When I say the word Beverly Hills, someone will immediately think of, okay, that's an affluent white area. The men are prominent. They have good jobs, whatever. There might be a few minorities of them there, but primarily it's successful. There's no rioting going on there. There's nothing bad going on there. There's no shootings going on there. If you took Beverly Hills, as we all know it to be now, and you suddenly arrested one out of every four white males in Beverly Hills, some of them unjustly, some of them unfairly, some of them targeted, and then you incarcerate them for longer than normal prison sentences, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years, with felonies that are maybe not necessarily true felonies. Uh, some of the black men that were getting arrested during the time early in Chicago, most kind of they're felony for just possessing marijuana, things like that, because the laws were put in there like that. But now, going back to the example of Beverly Hills, 1 in 4 white males arrested unfairly, longer than normal prison sentences. They have felonies now. So the only place they can go back to is Beverly Hills. And that cycle continues for 50 years. What is Beverly Hills going to look like? It will look like South Side of Chicago, with white people killing each other because they have no opportunity. They're living on top of each other in horrible situations. They're outcasts. You know, I just want people to open their eyes and look at it like that. Sure, black on black crime is horrible now, and they talk about abortions, black women, aborting their children, things like that. It's horrific. The 400 plus years that got us here, but you can't just say, let's not think about let's not even pay attention to, let's forget about what's happened all those 400 years from since 1619 or whatever, when the first black people were brought here from Africa, and then going through all the stuff that people have gone through until now. You've got to correct the wrongs that were done. I tell my son, and we're generations away from this problem being fixed, because you've got to start with the youth, really. And the white and black youth, they have to be educated differently to respect each other. A lot of racism is taught in the home. You've probably seen it, and some of your listeners probably see it. When kids are really, really little, really like 5, 6, they don't see race and color. They play with each other. They hug each other, white, black, Asian, all kinds of races. They get together. I know that because when my kids were little, I took them to, preschool, things like that, or, daycare. And so if you're in an integrated area where you see a lot of different ethnicities and the kids are playing in daycare, you see them all playing together. There's no racism there. Kids learn that. And it's too bad that we have that going on in this country. So I think when people are unhappy with how things are, they have to look at themselves.
And it's fair to say it's taught. No, it's okay, but it's fair to say it's taught both ways.
Oh, of course it is. Of course, oh, absolutely. It's taught both ways. It's taught both ways.
Yeah,
black people are taught to not like white people. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I told a story before. I had Coach Creighton on, who's in California out by you.
Sure.
And,
absolutely.
And we spoke about it a little bit, but I said, look, my father was a policeman for almost 30 years, and he had a chief come in, and the chief started doing things racially towards minorities, and my father took and went to battle with him because of what he was doing towards different races, and it took 2 or 3 years. He lost a lot of friends to demotions. People lost their jobs, and he battled through some adversity, but ultimately he won, and the chief was dismissed. And he wrote letters to every police station in the country to make sure that chief doesn't get the opportunity to do that again in another city, county, state, jurisdiction, whatever. So, yeah, it's nice. You do have some. There's some feedback and some things. I guess we can make this a debate if you want. There's people. There's people.
Well, it's volatile.
Way up.
I applaud your father. I applaud your father for that effort, and none of the progress that black people have made would not have happened without white people taking up the cause as well.
You'll have to jump on here, and you can jump into the feed. We've got another gentleman that doesn't like the Beverly Hills idea. He thinks that you're off course there, and he makes it known. But that's just what happens on social media. And we appreciate your opinion, Mr. Smith. Please speak it. It just says it. He said if you act if you act like an idiot and break the law, you get arrested, which we all know that.
Well,
Uh,
let me just say one thing to that listener. See, a lot of black people were unfairly incarcerated, and the George Floyd thing was a culmination of that. And if you can watch what happened to George Floyd, and I posted about it, you wouldn't believe the comments that I got deflecting that, saying that, well, he was a criminal and he shouldn't have been getting arrested anyway, and he shouldn't have been getting passing a bad, just totally jumping over the fact that he was murdered. That's what I want to talk about. Why was this human being, was it okay to take this life? And so this person that make comment like that is coming from the standpoint of black people are getting in trouble all by themselves with no help. And that, like they're all responsible for all their own actions. Well, sometimes, you get stopped by a bad police officer and things go south and you had nothing to do with that. Sometimes you get wrongly imprisoned or accused and you're in front of a white jury and you get wrongly convicted. So that's not exactly true. So this guy, I just would hope he would look a little deeper into it. Now, sure, you can always find cases where people deserve to be punished, but there are far too many cases of black people being unfairly prosecuted in our legal system. So that's all I'm trying to say, and I'm not trying to protect or to overlook when black people do stuff wrong. I mean, we should be punished just like anyone else.
and
But
I agree,
there's,
and I think that there are, you know, way more good people than there are bad people. There are way
I
more
agree with you 100%.
there are way more
I
good cops than there are bad cops, and there are way more
absolutely,
people. And I just I just hope this doesn't turn into where people of all races can feel like, hey, I can go out and commit a crime, but if I get when the police come, I can pull that card and be like, you're wrongfully arresting me, and this can snowball into something that it shouldn't be, where it should just be groups of people coming together, which has been a breath of fresh air because we've seen this is the first time we've ever seen where the police and the law enforcement have intermingled with our youth and have intermingled with the protesters and have for the most part been on their side to help them get to the next level
I
here. Now,
agree.
you
I
know,
agree
and we just
because
hope,
there's great people in America.
yeah, and we just hope that the protesters, I'm sorry, not the protesters, the looters do not dilute the word that the
Oh,
protesters on both sides are trying to come out and let everybody know. So um, it's pretty good. But so yeah, I mean that's obviously a conversation we can talk about for a long time. But, let's transition a little bit into obviously you have the Lee Kemp story that's out and wrestled away, and it speaks on the history of Lee Kemp, and that's how a lot of us have read and seen some of your diversity that you've been through. But maybe a lot of people don't know about kind of your upbringing. You just spoke about it a little bit, where you started in one side of Ohio and ended up somewhere else, and then maybe getting into basketball. And maybe the best thing that happened was you weren't very good at basketball,
that
huh?
was very good. Very good that happened.
Yeah, and then so now you get into wrestling, and talk about that. How do you think a young man as a freshman uh, went from not wrestling to two-time state champion, 55-0?
You know, I I have to go way back to probably my mom and dad probably, and this could speak to a lot of issues, even to your listener that commented about the race question, and then maybe my Beverly Hills example might not have been the best example, but I had great parents, and I think all leaders, white and black, point to the black family as one of the main reasons why we have the problems we have now. I was fortunate to have an intact, wonderful mother, black mother and father. However, I was adopted though to a teenager who already had a 2 year old, a black woman who had a 2 year old. She was herself 17 when I was born. She gave me up for adoption, and had I stayed with her my life, I'm sure. Well, obviously would have been different. Not saying I wouldn't have had a chance, but it would have been very difficult. Uh, I know my biological mom. She's a wonderful woman. I have two biological sisters. I communicate with them, but I just had more different opportunities because I was adopted at 5 years old. My mother named me Darnell. Darnell Freeman was my name, and so that brought out in my documentary. And so anyway, I was adopted to Leroy and Jesse Kemp, and they were from the South, from Mississippi. Like most black people, they left the South to have a better life, so they came north, and they settled in Cleveland. And I lived in the city of Cleveland, just on the outskirts, but Cleveland. And we were there during the racial tension, and Martin Luther King was assassinated in 1968. We were there then. Right after that, my parents moved to Chardon, and that part of it was to get like away from that because it was craziness. I was little, I was small. I mean, 1968, I was 12. I was old enough to know what was going on. So, but still, we moved to Chardon, and so coming from the Cleveland, I didn't play organized sports. We just played in the streets, and basketball is, every black kid is familiar with black basketball, even white kids, but I mean, really in the black community, and we played in the playgrounds and all that kind of stuff. So I went out for the basketball team when I got to Chardon, and maybe I wasn't as good as I thought I was. So I never made the team, and I never grew either. So maybe the coach was right, but I never played, and I never liked the idea of a coach just having full reign on whether you played or not, just pulling you in and out of games. And I'd sit on the bench, for 2 years, 7th and 8th grade, I got in for a total of maybe 20 seconds out of 2 years. So I was very frustrated. I always worked hard. I did all the sprints, I did all the drills. I was always one of the hardest working guys on the basketball team, but I never got to compete. So back then, as you know, the wrestling coaches used to recruit to get wrestlers out for the team. And so the wrestling coach was the gym teacher too, gym coach. And we had wrestling in gym class. I don't know if they still do that. So he recruited me to wrestle. He said, Lee, you're never going to play in basketball. And this is how he got me. He said, there's a spot open at 138 right now on the freshman team. If you go out, you can be wrestling for us this Friday. And we have a dual meet, freshman dual meet. So I thought, that sounds pretty good to me. And it seemed like to me, even in practice, everybody was participating, because I walked by the wrestling room a couple days to watch before I actually joined the team. In basketball practice, I was sitting the bench in basketball practice, because if you're up running scrimmages, the people that aren't playing has to sit. And so the people that are subbing in and out are playing, but the other people, the scrubs, aren't playing at all, even in practice. So I like the idea that at least in wrestling practice, everybody's participating. So I went out immediately, and I don't think the basketball coach cared at all. In fact, I'm sure he didn't care. He was probably glad I wasn't around. But I wrestled that Friday. I got the uniform on, and I'm wrestling for the freshman team, and I won my match, and I got hooked. So I dedicated myself to just trying to get better at that sport from that moment on.
And you obviously did.
It was a perfect storm of combat. It's hard to understand how that could actually happen like that. I call it a divine appointment. It was a blessing to find something that you're so comfortable with, or so. And it wasn't easy, of course, but it was just a labor of love that I was able to understand. I think
That's
I had a high school friend say to me that was on the wrestling team there. I still talk to occasionally. He said to me, his name was Dan Melise. He said, Lee, I always admired the fact that you, at such a young age, knew what you wanted. And that's what all of us, once we know what we want, any of us will be willing to work that hard for something, right? Doesn't have to be wrestling, it could be anything. But once you know what it is, any of us would dive in. And at a young age, I was able to understand that was something that I wanted.
Well, when do you think that your name really was put in lights? Was it when you got your story in Sports Illustrated? when you won the national, when you showed up on the scene at Wisconsin? When did people say? When do you think people were like, that's Lee Kemp there?
It was my sophomore year. I was 18 when I beat Gable. That was before the internet. So people, it just was a slow ripple effect throughout the country. First, you had to read about it if you happen to, because it made the AP wire services. So it was in papers throughout the whole country as a as a news story basically. So, but primarily around the Wisconsin area, it was front page sports, you know, and so from that
That's
moment
pretty
on, there
cool.
was like no hiding anymore. And at that point, I wasn't even a national champion. I was a runner up the year before, so like I wasn't, it wasn't like I was a national champion or anything like that. And it was in November of my sophomore year, so that in fact that was our first competition of my sophomore year in college.
I think most will say that, and you're breaking up a little bit, but you're coming back now. Um, I think most will say you won that match your freshman year.
You know what? I'd like to think so, and Chuck Yeagler would like to think he won it as well. So I like Chuck. I love Chuck. He's a good friend. Very, he's a great competitor. Great competitors bring out the best in each other, and Chuck definitely, when he showed up, he was there, ready to give his best performance. I wrestled him 4 times, and he beat me 3 of the 4 times. So at least my freshman year, I only beat him once, and he beat me 3 times. So I beat him the first time I wrestled him. But then the next year, I got I don't want to say the word revenge because it sounds like a negative word, but my sophomore year, I got to wrestle him in the All-Star match that we had, and I was able to beat him there.
Very cool. So uh, I was going to ask you, out in California, and I've talked to coaches. Like there's a coach here in Florida that does one of the club coaching up at Florida State, and he really he's trying to make a voice for junior college wrestling, community college wrestling, and creating something like that in Florida, like it is in California. Talk about how important community college wrestling is in California, and I know that you're deeply involved in it. You coach up at Sacramento State. Uh, why do you feel like that league is so important?
It's important in a state like California because of the size of the state. It's so large, and they have enough competing schools just within the state of California to create a very competitive tournament. Uh, so that was part of the reason. The second part is because California is on the West Coast, it's very expensive and difficult to compete nationally, to get away from the coast, for instance, and maybe compete with a school on the East Coast or even the Midwest for that matter. So those two factors made it very just open the door for what you see in California, and I think it's great. And when you think about it in that way, it's similar to even on the high school level. It's such a big state that wrestlers that come out of California as a state champ, they're pretty seasoned. They're pretty tough kids because of the depth of competition in the state. So with that being said, a third reason why it's important is because not every wrestler is going to make it to a Division One, Division Two, Division Three NAIA four-year college. Some athletes need an opportunity to go to a community college to start their academic career and to continue their career as athletes, because athletics is a pretty important part of growth and development, and that's why it's in the educational system of all of our schools. That's why physical education is part of the curriculum of all of our public schools. And then when you have the opportunity to compete in sports in high school, it is equally important to be able to continue it when you move on. So the community college environment has been the launching point for a lot of careers. A lot of wrestlers went to community colleges for a couple of years before they went to D1 colleges to further their academic and athletic careers. So yeah, it's very important because not everybody is going to be able to afford. First of all, that's another factor. to be able to afford to go to a D1 college, or D2, D3, whatever, without a scholarship. So the community college environment provides affordability and the ability to continue your education and your athletic career.
Yeah. So, and your picture is pixelating a little bit. Um, what I wanted to ask you was, what would you recommend, or what do you tell young men out there that are maybe juniors and seniors to prepare them for the next level, for when they get to some level of college, or if they decide to go to the
Well,
Olympic
I,
Training
I think
Center?
it's important. I, I, I think it's important for a younger wrestler to gain as much exposure as they possibly can when they're in high school, so that they can make a good assessment as to where their skills are. Because obviously, if you, I use Tom Ryan as a good example, the head coach at Ohio State University right now. He ended up at Iowa, which is the premier college of that day, but he would not have probably been able to go there right out of high school. He went to Edinburgh, which was a Division I college, was a little bit not as high powered as Iowa, but once he was there and got his feet wet, got himself established, then he left and went to Iowa. So I think because Tom Ryan aspired for more. He wanted to be part of the best program that the country had to offer. So I would say uh, the athlete should try to get a good assessment as to where they're at. Maybe their coach can help them make that assessment, maybe their parents, and then try to put themselves in the best spot that they possibly can to achieve goals that they have. In Tom Ryan's case, he wanted to be a national champion, and he felt his chances were better at Iowa than they were at Edinburgh. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. But obviously, if you go to the number one college in the country with Gable as your coach, and you make the team, and you have Gable coaching you for a couple years, you would think that would be probably the best situation that you could make for yourself to be a national champion. So, I mean, Tom Ryan's path was one that I admire, that I think other athletes could follow a similar path.
Yeah, and so before we get into my little 10-question thing I do, I want to know, what did it mean to you to get inducted into the Hall of Fame?
Inducted into what? I didn't hear that.
Uh, what did it mean to you to get inducted into the Hall of Fame?
Well, the National Hall of Fame from the U.S. It's in Stillwater, Oklahoma. That was an honor for sure. I because it shows that you've achieved some things that were so noteworthy that they wanted them to be archived, I guess, for history. So it's to be there with all the great names in our country is definitely satisfying. But I would say my induction to the International Wrestling Hall of Fame is truly also um, gratifying, to be in one of only 6 Americans to be in the Hall of Fame that honors wrestlers throughout the whole world is humbling and gratifying as well.
Where can we go to learn more about the greatest season and the show, and kind of get access to it?
To my website, leekemp.com. You can go to my website, just leekemp.com. I have
Okay.
information there about my documentary and my book, and the recently launched video series, Your Greatest Season. So just going to my website.
And that's where your books are, Winning Gold, and all your tapes and
Yes,
everything, correct?
correct.
Awesome.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Man, this is, I mean, we could talk for another hour. This has been tremendous, and just totally honored speaking with you. And I hope we were able to discuss a lot of good things. We discussed the Olympics. We discussed Dan Gable, your community college, the Lee Kemp story, the greatest season, obviously college at Wisconsin, Sports Illustrated, junior and senior year going undefeated. I mean, what more, uh, man? What more is there to? I mean, you just have so much. So before I ask you these, how many young men have challenged you on the mat at the club, and you had to still show them that that body can roll?
Well, I'm a little I'm more than willing to throw myself out there. I'll put it that way. So um, I pride myself in that. That's kind of my image. I kind of feel like as a coach, as a person, that I feel like I have to embody it, and I have to look the part. So I'm really focused on my diet, nutrition, and being fit. But I'm not without injuries. You know, I've had a hip replacement. You know, things like that too. So, but I still I don't go hard with guys anymore. But I still can spar. I've got a son that's a college sophomore that I spar with him, try to teach him a bit. But uh, I pride myself in being able to still teach good technique, and I'm still learning too. And I hopefully I'll be able to stay on the mat for a long, a long time.
It's all, where is your son at now?
He's at Fresno State University now, and
Oh,
they
good for
just
him.
brought the program back after it being dropped for like 9+ years. I mean, it was horrible having it, a major California school not having wrestling for so many years, and they just brought it back. This is the third year that they've been back now.
Is it nice to be a parent in the stands?
Yes, and having your kid in wrestling is like child abuse, actually. You know, when you put them in early. So, but they come out the other end as better people, I believe. I think they learn so much about themselves uh, in a sport like wrestling.
That's awesome. Bob Howard Camp said that you are wrestling's Kareem Abdul-Jabbar.
Oh my gosh. Well, you know, I
And
respect
then
Kareem a lot. I respect him a lot, and people forget about him. The younger generation, they only see LeBron and Michael and you know, Larry Bird and others. You know, they don't go back that far. They don't go back that far. But Kareem really
yeah,
has all the records still, and people don't even say that anymom for
oh
some
yeah, I
reason.
mean, I remember watching him. I grew up a Larry Bird fan, so I got my heart broken a lot by him. um, but Coach Morris said I took Lee down at the AC with John Jura.
Oh my goodness. Oh man. Well, back then I was still I was fit back then. So if he got a takedown back then, he was tough because I wasn't giving up many takedowns.
And, uh, how much have you? How much have? How much do you think wrestling has developed since you were in college or at the Olympic level?
Oh, I think it's developed a lot, just as other sports. I think the wrestlers are more athletic, maybe. I see them doing more athletic moves. They're innovating moves. There's no really new moves, but they're just cycles of when they surface again. There's an era of wrestlers like Yanni Diakmahalis, like like David Taylor, like Jordan Burroughs, like whatever. You keep, Kyle Snyder. You see the stuff they're able to do. Frank Chamizo, who's a wrestler from Italy, but he's a Cuban-born wrestler, immigrated to Italy, but spends most of his time in the United States. Any wrestler probably knows of the name Frank Chamizo, multiple-time world medalist, the whole bit. Talk about athletic and the things he could do on a wrestling mat. You didn't see those kind of things back when I competed. So, and the stuff that Kyle Date can do, you don't see those kind of things, that kind of athleticism. Um, so that's the first thing I see, and I think the training methods are different. That produces those type of athletes. Nutrition is different. Recovery and science is different. So you're going to have a better athlete to start with, and then when you add to it the new or enhanced or innovative wrestling moves that they throw at you, it just makes for what you see today in wrestling.
I think in any sport, right? Like you know, when you look at like the quarterbacks these days are the size of linemen back when I
Oh
was
my
a kid.
gosh.
And
Yes.
it's just different eras. Like they want to compare LeBron to Michael. I mean, it's just a different athlete, you know? I mean, in my opinion, Michael was the best pure athlete I saw as far as in the era of basketball that I enjoyed and loved. But if you compare the athlete, obviously LeBron is just a specimen, right? And it's due to that the new nutrition, the new workouts, the new things they have access to, and and I'm sure that the money is different. Michael Jordan is wealthy now, but when he was a basketball player, some of his contracts wouldn't add up to some of the worst
Oh,
contracts today.
no. No, he made his money through Nike, through shoe contracts, things like
Yeah,
that.
that was pretty cool. Well, so I've got some questions for you. You ready, sir?
Yes, absolutely.
All right. So the Reno or the Body Bar?
Whoa, that's a good question. You know what? I really can't say because I don't really. I I hope they're. I hope we have them both. But are you as the question that which one to go to, or are they at the same time?
Yeah, I
Is that
know
the
just
question?
which one you prefer or which one.
Well, as an athlete, I think you have to decide which one uh, is going to be the one that challenges you the most, maybe, or maybe
Okay.
the one that the one that you are ready for at this time. Like for instance, I wouldn't discourage anyone from putting themselves at a high level competition, but if you jump into something like that too early, it could be a discouraging experience too. Let's face it, parents have to cart our kids around. So if you enter into one of these tournaments and the parents are driving for 6 or 7 or 8 or 9, 10 hours and for one match or two matches, that doesn't really. I just think that may not be the best use of your time, but it just depends on what you're going to get out of it. You could be at the tournament, lose two matches, but just absorb the whole tournament because you're there watching everything and you're aspiring for where you want to be at. You get
Sure.
into the tournament because you think you deserve to be there. You want to become an All-American. You want to place, win it, whatever. So it's a lot of different perspectives to it.
Sure. More dominant, a pin or a tech?
That's a great question. I would say a tech shows dominance because when you can consistently score and outscore your opponents by the margin of a tech, whether it's 10 or 12 points, whatever it is, versus a pin in a lot of cases could be like a knockout in boxing. Maybe you caught your opponent. Some pins
Yeah,
are ones that you grind through and you can actually just grind your opponent into a pin. I think some pins come because you just catch your opponent and they get pinned. So I think a tech shows more dominance. A pin is more exciting. It's just like a dunk in basketball, dunk versus a layup.
yeah,
They
absolutely.
both score, but one's more
All right.
impressive.
The Dixie or the Tulsa Nationals?
Well, just from, I that's, after my time in wrestling, I'd always been out of wrestling for a long time, so I know that that's a big tournament for younger wrestlers, and they both have huge name recognition. Tulsa maybe having a little bit more, maybe because it's been around longer, possibly from my limited experience with it. I did not have any kids that wrestled in it. My son wasn't into wrestling during that time. During that time in his life, he didn't. He only started wrestling basically in junior high school. But the Tulsa has a big name. It rings true. Dixie Nationals is pretty big too. I'd want to win them both. If I was good enough to be at any of those tournaments, I'd have them both on
Good.
my calendar.
All right. Um, you've got one day to train. Do you do a live go or a clinic?
Wow, that's a good question. Well, I think live wrestling before your competition is not probably a good idea for a lot of reasons, uh, injuries or whatever, things like that. But what I think a person has to have their routine, and everybody's routine may be different. I come from an era where we did do a lot of hard wrestling before we wrestled. I mean, the day before. It was more hard sparring, hard drilling, But yeah, I definitely put in a pretty good practice the day before I competed. And part of it was to cut weight, and part of it was just the way we did it back then.
Understood.
Now, I would say it just depends on the athlete. Some
Yeah. What
athletes like to
that?
take it totally easy the day before, meaning they don't want to be, drilling real hard or going for 5 mile runs or whatever. My mentality was I didn't want to a, I didn't want my routine to change very much. I was working hard Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, the meets on Friday. Well, I'm going to tone it down a little bit, but then Friday I get on the mat for my competition, and I really haven't been away from the toughness of practice because I try to make sure all my practices had a little bit of toughness in them, even the day before a competition. But that was my era, though. My era was, I think, a little bit different.
I understood. What do you think is more prestigious, the Fargo or the 32?
Wow, that's a. I think there again. I think the Fargo Junior Nationals came earlier when it was the Iowa City Junior Nationals, and I competed in it in 1974, and I think 1971 was the first year that they had it. I think that is the older tournament, the Fargo or Iowa City turning into Fargo, going from the Iowa Fieldhouse to the Fargo Dome. And it's just the name recognition it's almost like the Super Bowl, sort of.
Like
Super
for you,
32 has grown to be very prestigious and big as well. Both national caliber tournaments. The only thing I would say is the Fargo tournament you have to qualify for through your state associations, typically by being first or second or third in your state freestyle or Greco events. I'm not sure what the qualifying process is for the Super 32, um, but I think they're both prestigious. Maybe Fargo might be a little more prestigious, or might have more name recognition possibly.
got it. The Pan Ams or the Cadet Worlds?
Wow, these are some tough questions. You
Got
know, I'd say the worlds because it encompasses the wrestling nations of the world that are really strong, and meaning Europe. You include Europe in a wrestling competition, which includes, Russia, you know, Bulgaria, things like that. That then you have a tough, very tough tournament,
Worlds it
including
is.
Asia. But then the Pan Am Games are only the Western Hemisphere countries, which kind of exclude the tougher countries. Cuba's in there, of course, which they're tough. Canada is not as tough. So when I've competed in the Pan Am Games, it was typically a dual meet when you got to the finals, USA and Canada typically, and Cuba didn't always enter, but now it seems like they're being more represented in Pan American competition. So Cuba is definitely a team to beat.
I like it. You prefer freestyle or Greco?
Well, in my era, Greco wasn't emphasized hardly at all. I mean, there were very few, if any, Greco tournaments at all. So I never had any Greco training at all. So my orientation was freestyle because that was the closest style to high school and college. I think wrestlers coming up today have to have a foundation, some kind of foundation in Greco-Roman wrestling. I prefer freestyle because it's the most similar to high school and college.
Got it. All right. Badger football or Badger basketball?
Oh my goodness. Wow. Well, when I was at Wisconsin, both teams had not developed into what they are today. We were still Big Ten, but we were right in the middle of the pack, maybe. Some years we'd have losing records, some years we'd have winning records. We were just like our football team would go 6-5 or something like that.
Oh, wow. Well, they don't do
It
that now.
wasn't the big time program we have now, that's for sure. So now, as a sports fan in Wisconsin, it's probably is a pleasure to go to either because you're going to see some great competition. You're going to have a full house. The game's going to be on TV, the whole bit.
Do you still get back there often?
Since I now moved to California 2 years ago, Prior to moving, though, I was living in Chicago, and so I would get up to Madison. I'd say fairly frequently, primarily doing things with the wrestling team back when Barry Davis was the coach and Mitch Hull was one of the assistant coaches. Mitch was a teammate of mine, so Mitch kept me pretty plugged into what was going on there.
That
And
had to be
now
cool.
it's a whole different coaching staff, and I moved anyway, so it makes it a little bit harder.
How about being a college kid and Lee Kemp walks in the room? That's got to be pretty cool, huh?
Being what?
I said, how about being a college kid and Lee Kemp walks into your room? That's got to be pretty cool.
I appreciate those comments. I try to give back, if you can call it that. That's what I'm trying to do now. I try to make myself available to high school kids. I still teach at clubs through here now in California. There's a club called Matt Time here in California that I'm involved with pretty heavily. So I work with a Team Alpha Male, which is a mixed martial arts organization in Sacramento, headed by Uriah Faber. He's a UFC Hall of Famer. And we all know how important wrestling is to the fight game. I'm not a fighter, but I can teach fighters some of the wrestling components they could use to help them win their fights. So yeah, it's been a real diverse but enjoyable ride that I've been on, this wrestling ride.
That's fun. And coaching those athletes and the respect that these athletes have for you in the room and to learn from you have got to mean a ton. And it's Bono who's the coach at Wisconsin.
Yes, and he's turned things around already there. See, it seems like anyway.
I think he's Coach Cirillo said he's a Florida guy, so go
Yeah,
Florida.
he is. That's right, he is. National champ, world team member, the whole bit. Yeah.
So you those Ohio winters or those California summers?
Oh, if I never see another snowflake again for the rest of my life, I don't care. It'll be too soon. If I never see one for the rest of my life, that even would still be too soon.
That's great. I visited Chicago. I visited one summer with my family, and I came home and I was telling everybody how much man, Chicago's amazing. I love that town. Oh my God. And they're like, because you went in the summer. Go back in the winter and tell me how much you like it. And I'm like,
you would. No. Unfortunately, a lot of people have moved to Chicago because of that. They've gone there in the spring and summer, and they're thinking, "Wow, and it is a beautiful city for sure." But it is difficult, boy.
Not when the wind is going. But that's awesome. Hey, I could continue. We could get into so many more things, and I hope I get the opportunity to meet you one day in person. I hope I get the opportunity to do this again. And I know we shared mobile phone numbers, and it's amazing to just get to meet you. And like I told you before, I've only been as a parent in wrestling 2 years, but as an American, you knew the name Lee Kemp, and just as an American icon, American athlete, and a world champ. I mean, I just grew up as a kid, and I knew the name Lee Kemp and Dan Gable and Ken Shirtow and all those guys. And it's just to meet you in person now is just an honor from a young kid that was watching the USA do big things, and to get to meet you now and talk to you is just an absolute pleasure. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me on, and I hope your listeners enjoyed the discussions that we've had back and forth. So thank you.
For sure, and you have a great day, and enjoy that California sun. And again, God bless.
Thank you so much.
All right.